Ethics and strategy. Why he has to go for negotiations to avoid war? He brings in this question of ethics. At the same time, he brings the question of strategy. First, let us take up the issue of ethics. He says, I have to avoid war because it is my personal problem with my cousins. There is property, I have to claim back my property. But why all the soldiers have to die for this? It is completely unethical for all the soldiers to die for our own personal problem. It is completely unethical to go for war. So it is better for me to avoid war so that I avoid the killing of all the soldiers, all the common public for this. And the second ethical question he raises is, if I go for war, you will also die, all of you will die. It is my problem. If I die, it's okay, but all of you dying is also not ethical. My family members not dying is also not ethical. Third thing he says, that after all, on the other side, I have my teachers. I should not kill my teachers. Drona, Dronacharya, Kripacharya. So if I say, I want my land, I want my kingdom, never mind whether it is a guru, Dronacharya or Kripacharya, then it is too much of greed. Out of greed, I would be killing my gurus, Dronacharya and Kripacharya. That is not ethical. Then he says, I have a responsibility to my lineage. People have, actually for the generation that probably doesn't know these things, I have to give some background. In Vaidika Dharma, in Vaidika code of conduct, it is believed that one should not marry for the sake of sex and sexual pleasure. Marriage is only for the purpose of continuing the human race. Only for santana one should marry. And that santana is the responsibility of the person because as per the Vaidika Dharma, you have earth here, Pitraloka here, all the other lokas like Swarga, Naraka, Yakshaloka, Gandharvaloka, and all the moksha lokas that are at the top are all built on the Pitraloka. And the Sukshma Shariras, I'll be using careful words, younger generation, please remember those words. We use words like RIP when somebody dies, rest in peace. Who has to rest in peace? Then immediately they say, Atma has to rest in peace. Where is this Atma? As per Vaidika Dharma, there is this Atman is a different concept than the one which goes to the upper worlds, the higher worlds. Atman is in Bhagavad Gita, it is described as Nainam Chindanti Shastrani, Nainam Dahati Pavakaha. You have heard these shlokas. So, how can that travel? And why should it rest in peace? Where is it resting in peace? This resting in peace, both are typically Abrahamic concepts. They are Christian concepts. They are talking about something called a soul, S-O-U-L, soul. Okay? That soul is restless after death. But if there is chief ghost, Jehovah's grace, it can rest in peace up to the time of final judgment. After the final judgment, it can go either to heaven or hell, Jahannam or Jannat. Jannat or Jahannam. Until then, Qayamat tak, they have to wait. Up to the time of Qayamat, they have to keep waiting. And keep waiting in rest is the meaning of the word rest in peace. This absolutely doesn't suit Vaidika way of looking at things, because in Vaidika way of looking at things, what you have is Sthula Sharira. What happens at the time of death according to Vaidika Dharma is Sukshma Sharira leaves the Sthula Sharira, and the Sukshma Sharira along with Linga Sharira and Karana Sharira travels upwards. Of course, Atman is always there inside. Atman is the core. This Atman is covered by the Linga Sharira and Sukshma Sharira. So, this Sukshma Sharira with Atman inside, and because of Linga Sharira, it is called Linga because it is causal body, Karana Sharira. So, it goes into the higher worlds, and there the Sukshma Shariras stay, not the Atman. And these Sukshma Shariras which stay in the higher worlds, because they are staying there, they are called Pitru Loka. They are Pitars. They stay as Pitars there. And these Pitars, as per their karmas, Punya or Papa karmas, experience Papa in Naraka and Punya in Swarga. Shine Punye Martya Lokam Vishanti. After experiencing all the Punya, they come down. The rule there is that after the Kshinatva of Punya, when the Sukshma Sharira has to come down to take birth, there has to be space on the earth. And for people to occupy Pitraloka or Swargaloka also, there has to be space. In Pitraloka, when they wait to go to Swarga, the gods there keep saying, wait, it is crowded. Swargaloka is crowded, you cannot go now. Why is Swargaloka crowded? Because from the Swargaloka, Sukshma Shariras are not entering the earth. Why Sukshma Shariras are not entering the earth? Because people are not getting married, they are not conceiving. So, when somebody conceives on the earth, one Sukshma Sharira gets permission to come down. Because one vacancy has been created, one Pitar from the Pitraloka is permitted to go up. So, these Pitars, when they are waiting in Pitraloka, I want to go up. They say, from Swargaloka, those Sushma Sharis are not moving. Then they say, what can I do? Then these Pitars are told by the gods there that ask your grandson to have children. If your grandson his wife conceives, because one Sukshma Sharira has been permitted to come down, one vacancy has been created because of your grandson, we will permit you. Okay. So, there is a message that the person has to lead to conception. So, this idea that marriage is for this purpose of bringing down the Pitars from the Pitraloka, from the Swargaloka downwards, for the circulation of Sukshma Shariras from the Pitralokas to earth, that is the purpose of Vivaha, Udvaha. Okay, it is Uttvahanam. It is actually there is a circulation that is taking place. That is why you have to get married. Okay. So, because of all this, now what I am doing is, if I am waging war, my Pitars from the Pitralokas, they are looking at my lineage. I am destroying the whole lineage by waging war. All the Pitars from above who are trying to protect the...
From what you explained right now, how do we explain the population expansion? So, the total number of population should remain the same, no? Then, and how did the creation first start if there was nobody in the Swargaloka? Okay. So, how do we explain the increase in population then? Means if somebody takes birth, means somebody has to come down from the Swargaloka. So then it means there's a cycle and the total number of lives also should
correct. This has been a repeated question. I don't want to use the word rotten, but a very repeated question about these births and deaths, cycles and all that. It has been repeated so many times, it has become a cliche. See, in Vaidika Dharma or all the dharmic religions, Buddhism, Jainism, when they count births, they don't count only in the form of human beings. So human populations, human demography is not the measure. The total number of beings, total number of living organisms are counted. So if human population is increasing, probably there is a decrease of another creature, the number of those creatures. So when you allow, for example, through conception, another pitar is released, but that released pitar may go into the fish also. That released pitar might go into some other birth also, but at least he is released. Once he is released, there is a vacancy and your pitar, your ancestor can go there. That circulation can take place. But the pitars from above always look for the expansion, spread, branching out of the lineage, Vamsha. And because that lineage has to be expanded, those pitars are always blessing you to continue the lineage. If I wage the war, I will not be able to continue the lineage because the whole lineage gets destroyed. So this is another ethical wrong that I would be committing by killing all the people. And another thing that Yudhishthira mentions is that my mother doesn't like war. My mother doesn't like myself waging war against my own cousins. And it is always my responsibility to fulfill the wishes of my mother. If I wage war, I will be violating the wishes of my mother. That is why it is wrong. It is unethical. So he goes on listing ethical aspects, violating the wishes of the mother, violating the wishes of all the ancestors, violating the wishes of the gurus, and killing the gurus, killing cousins, killing all these people. These are personal, but he keeps on saying that soldiers dying during the war is unethical, so for that I have to avoid war. Then come the strategic aspects. In strategic aspects, he doesn't say it in so many words, he never, because he is outwardly, because it is a court, it is a full court, where he is talking to Krishna, is actually a court where all the kings are sitting and all the soldiers are sitting. So it is not strategically right to very clearly mention the strategy, but from his words it becomes very clear what his strategy is. He says, Krishna, when you go there, you speak about my intention to avoid the war. And Krishna very clearly says, I know what you are saying, why you are asking me to speak about your disinterest in war. I will definitely communicate that to them. So the idea is, if you show to the other party that you are not interested in war, then the impression among the soldiers of Duryodhana would be that Yudhishthira is not a warmonger. War is being forced upon Yudhishthira. And obviously, all people, public, they don't generally like wars because at the time of war, taxes are increased. There is so much of crunch, there is so much of food problem that happens. So those people will be blaming only Duryodhana, that our own king, Duryodhana, is pushing Yudhishthira into war. It is not Yudhishthira who pushed us into war. And that creates a lot of loss of morale for Duryodhana because his own people are against him. Not only people, even the soldiers who have to fight the war, they also get demoralized because they also have no supporting idea for Duryodhana. They think that Duryodhana is the one who is a warmonger, who is pushing. So to create that impression, I have to repeatedly send the negotiations. Sri Krishna's negotiation is the third one that takes place. Already 2 negotiations have taken place. He says, I have to still send. Strategic idea is that I have to create the impression that I am trying to avoid the war at any cost. This creates an impression among the soldiers of Duryodhana. It is that it is their king that is forcing the war. Then they will not cooperate with Duryodhana during the war. And I am going to face 11 Akshauhinis of army on the side of Duryodhana, whereas I have only 7 Akshauhinis. Mine is a small army. And though I have Arjuna, Bhima, very great warriors on my side, there are greater warriors on the other side, Drona, Bhishma and all these people. If they wage the fullest war wholeheartedly, it's very difficult to face them. So best way is to give an impression to Drona and Bhishma that I am on the side of Dharma. I am avoiding the war. I have tried to avoid the war to the best of my ability. When I repeatedly send these negotiating persons, the mediators, attorneys on behalf of me, then Bhishma Drona repeatedly keep saying, see, our Yudhishthira, he's such a nice guy. He always wants to avoid the war. And the more I create this kind of an impression on me, during the war, Drona and Bhishma cannot participate in the war wholeheartedly. When I do this, their lack of wholeheartedness weakens Duryodhana. I have to do this. I have to create an impression among Drona, Bhishma, Kripa, Bahlika is also there on the other side. All the elders in the lineage, all the elders in the dynasty and all the gurus that I am on the right side. I am trying to avoid the war as much as possible. This is another strategy. And there is another strategy there that by sending repeated negotiations, I will be buying more time for war. The more the time that I get, more planning can be done, more affiliations can be acquired. I can get more and more friends, more and more kingdoms joining my army. I can convince more people, I can persuade, I can do more strategies, I can acquire more astras, more shastras, everything. So for this, I have to postpone the war as much as possible so that my preparation time is expanded, elongated. So for that, I have to do as many negotiations as possible. This is another strategic idea. And the one which Krishna himself mentions is that, oh, Yudhishthira, I understand why you are sending me there. I'll go with spies. When I go for negotiation there, I'll go with a big team of spies and I'll be doing spying also there. And at the high time of war, spies are not allowed inside that kingdom so easily. But because of the diplomatic immunity, my men will be allowed inside the kingdom because they are all my men. I am a diplomat. I am going along with a message. So, my men who come as soldiers, guards to protect me, they'll be doing spying also there. And he says, Yudhishthira, you know that I myself am a big spy. When I will be speaking in the court, my eyes will be on whoever is sitting there. Whoever is supporting Duryodhana, whoever is sitting not wholeheartedly there, whoever is looking at me with positive looks, I will be observing and I will come back with all that information to you. That will be useful for us during the war. I will tell you that king was not wholeheartedly supporting Duryodhana. I was watching him during the court, during the speech in the court. I will give you all this information. Krishna says during Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, while answering Yudhishthira's speech, during his speech, he says, don't worry, I'll definitely go there and I'll do this. So, all these strategic aspects come out during the speeches of Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, all these, and particularly Krishna, when he responds, he keeps on saying that, yes, I understand why you are repeatedly sending messages, why you are repeatedly sending negotiations. Okay? So, this Yudhishthira is not all that nice guy. Yudhishthira is not all that gullible, is not all that soft. He is a very big strategist. His repeated negotiations also had a strategic interest. He was also planning spying at that time. So, this simultaneous negotiation and war preparation were going on. Dharmaja, Yudhishthira keeps on saying he is doing for ethics only. Yes, he literally is doing for ethics only, but at the same time is doing it for strategy also. How do you know that they are pretending in the court? In this parva, what you see is that Arjuna, while speaking to Krishna, not only Arjuna, even Yudhishthira, he stops his speech in the middle. He says, please go negotiate for us, please make us get united, please avoid the war and all that. At some point he pauses and says, no, Krishna, I now remembered, please don't go. After begging him for hours, then he says, don't go. Then he says, why? He says, Duryodhana and Dushasana, Karna, all these people are bad people. They might even kill you. When you go there as a diplomat, they don't follow even these diplomatic ethics that a diplomat cannot be killed. Then Krishna says, yeah, I understand what you are saying, but remember who is going there. I am a macho. I am a hero. Hey, you remember whomever I killed from childhood. The entire Duryodhana's army is just nothing before me. He says, then Dharmaraja innocently, pretending innocence, he says, oh, you are such a big hero? Then it's all right. You go there. Look at this man. He himself started the whole court. Entire program was started by him only for the purpose of asking Krishna to go. And then he suddenly says, please don't go. And then he says, they are very big heroes, they might kill you, they are villains, they are very bad people. And makes Krishna say that, I'll go, I'm a hero. This is to commit the other person. Make the other person commit and say, I'm okay. If Krishna's wives, they are 8 and 16,000. If they come and say, hey, my husband got killed there or my husband got damaged, hurt there, injured there, he will say, ma'am, I asked him not to go. I told him not to go. I told him that they are villains, they might kill him. But he himself said, I'm a macho, I can do this, I can do that. What can I do? Then I allowed him to go. This fellow Yudhishthira is like that. He is a highly big strategist. He is not so gullible as we think. Then, another example of his strategic thinking is Draupadi starts speaking. Huh? The strategy is part of dharma, ma'am. Yes. Strategy is part of dharma. Dharma does not mean being gullible. Strategy, killing is also part of dharma. Okay, conspiracy is also part of dharma. That is why you need a Kautilya. Okay? Okay, so the whole problem that we are discussing is statecraft. It is craft. Craft is skill, it's an art. You have to be skillful in doing state management, government management. You should not be sitting as a gullible person there saying, oh no, human rights, don't kill Pakistan soldiers are innocent people, their human rights will be violated and all that. Don't sit as Narendra Modi there. Vacate the position there, make some intelligent fellow, the clever fellow to sit there, some strategist to sit there. People talk about Mahatma Gandhi's statesmanship and shrewdity also. They say he was not just a non-violence person, he was a highly shrewd politician also. He was not only a statesman, he was a big politician also. He knew when to start, which kind of dharna, when to keep quiet, when to attack also. He looked very soft. Mahatma Gandhi, that soft face, that oldish, girl-like, woman-like smile, that childish, childlike smile and all that, that fellow is very dangerous also. The, how dangerous Mahatma Gandhi was, Britishers know. Ask them. They know how dangerous he was. Dharmaraja was the old Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi of Dwapara Yuga. He was also looking like very, very soft. I come from Telugu language. I teach Telugu classical literature. I teach Telugu Mahabharata to my students. In the Telugu Mahabharata, the author, while describing Yudhishthira at one place, uses the word, he is a soft tiger. What does he call him? Soft tiger, soft looking tiger. He looks like a cat. Catishly, he folds his legs and sleeps as though he is very innocent, but you never know when it is going to roar and jump and leap on you. Right? Dharmaraja is like that. Yudhishthira is like that. He's a big strategician. He's doing all this. Look at what he is doing. When Sahadeva stands up all of a sudden and says, my brother is a fool, he says. He is sending for negotiations. Negotiations are not suitable for villains like Duryodhana. I hate it. We have to kill him. War is the only option. He goes on scolding Dharma, Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, everyone. Usually, Yudhishthira has the habit of scolding them. For example, when Draupadi was shouting in Virata Parva that no one is coming to my help and all that, he immediately shouted at Draupadi and said, yes, go inside, keep quiet. This is not suitable for a woman and all that. But at this time, when Sahadeva is doing all this, Yudhishthira did not say anything. Why? He wanted someone to say all this because he knew that war was most probably the option. In spite of he sending so many negotiations, war was the option he knew. And by the time of war, if he keeps on sending negotiations, the soldiers in his camp might think that, okay, negotiations might succeed and there can be no war at all. But he wanted someone to say that, yes, war is required, they are villains, they are very bad people, we have to attack them and all that. He wanted to keep the mood of anger among the soldiers. And he allowed Sahadeva. Why he allowed only Sahadeva? He can always say that, oh, he is a young man, he is always like that, bachcha hai, aise hi bolta hai, chhod do. Right? He allowed Sahadeva to say all this and he never stopped him when he was doing. Immediately Satyaki stood up and supported Sahadeva and said, yes, this is the option, war is the only option, let us all go now. Immediately attacked Duryodhana. Then also Dharmaraja, Yudhishthira did not say anything. And Draupadi rose. And Draupadi was weeping. She was giving a long speech out of sorrow and anger both. Both these moods. She was giving a long speech. Yudhishthira did not say a word. He did not utter a word. Why? On an earlier occasion, he stopped her. During Virata Parva, he shouted at her. But he is not shouting at her now. Why? Again, strategy. He wanted to keep the mood of anger among his soldiers within his party intact. It will be kept intact only when a woman weeps. If a man weeps, nobody gets sympathy. They even shout at him, why? You are a man, why are you shouting? But if a woman weeps, everyone gets the sympathy. And when she is narrating how she was disrobed and how she was violated, all the soldiers there get angry and Yudhishthira allows all that. So that the mood of anger is kept intact at the time of war. So the way he is organizing the whole mood of the group, it is not commensurate or it is not matching with the mood of ethics that he is speaking. Why he wants to avoid the war and all that. He is balancing both the ethics side and the strategy side of going for the war. He knew that war was going to be the option, most probably, because he already saw Sanjaya negotiation failing. 2 Sanjaya negotiations have already failed. And this is the 3rd negotiation. So there is every possibility of this also failing. War can be the only option. He knew all this. So he was keeping the mood of anger intact inside the court. Now, can you tell me what is the analogy we have now in India for all this? Indo-Pak relationship, Indo-Pak war. I already yesterday brought the analogy between Sahadeva and the people who always shout that we have to attack Pakistan. Those who are shouting that we have to attack Pakistan immediately are compared to Sahadeva. But now the people in the position of Prime Minister, whether it was Manmohan Singh earlier, now Narendra Modi, in future some other Godi, whoever it is, occupying the Prime Minister's position there, he has the responsibility of this strategy. For example, if there are some fringe elements who are shouting that there has to be war, we have to attack Pakistan, the leader there doesn't say anything. People keep saying he is not stopping them. He is silent. He is not stopping the fringe elements from shouting. These fringe elements are like Sahadeva, we have to keep quiet. They are useful for us. For strategy, they are useful because the mood of anger among the general public against Pakistan has to be kept intact. And whenever on the negotiation table, people go towards the negotiation table, the leaders, the heads of the state in India, they keep saying that it's a terrorist country. It has to be declared a terrorist country. They are doing all things that are bad, but we are still prepared for negotiations. This talk for general public looks like, what is this? They themselves are saying that it's a terrorist country. They themselves are saying that they are very bad people. They are again saying that we are prepared for negotiations. This talk, which is so complex, is understandable only when you understand books like Mahabharata. The way Yudhishthira is speaking. The book Mahabharata is showing how complex strategic management is, how complex war management is, how complex management of international relations with an enemy country which is every day digging for war. It is inviting you for war, which is itching for war. How to maintain relations with them, it is being shown in this case.
So when Krishna goes for negotiation, he asks at least 5 or 1 village be given to Pandavas.
No, that was already done, not Krishna. Yudhishthira has sent already a message through Sanjaya that he is contented with 5 towns. Okay.
Oh, after that, this negotiation
Krishna
happens.
goes, yeah.
Actually, what I was thinking was if Duryodhana accepts to that thing,
No.
then the strategy will fail.
The episode that we are discussing in the class today, that is called Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, there itself Yudhishthira says, Krishna, do you remember? What did I ask for? After all, 5 towns, just 5 towns, this Duryodhana is not ready to give those 5 towns. At least, so he is so greedy that he is not ready to give me those 5 towns also. So that is again a strategy. Why he repeats this? For example, if you want to convince United States and Russia and all the powers which have great weaponry, advanced weaponry with them, that you are a good boy, India is a good boy, Pakistan is a bad boy, you have to always say, I did not want anything. I am ready to forego POK, which is mine actually. POK is mine. So for that you have to bring to the negotiation table that first, for example, that POK is mine, has to be brought. Whenever Musharraf wanted to say that Kashmir is the main topic of the agenda of our negotiations, Atal Bihari Vajpayee used to say, yes, it's very, very important because I have to ask for POK. Kashmir is very important. Because Kashmir is very important, I am going to ask for POK, and Musharraf used to drop Kashmir. You understand? So this is a strategy. You have to say, I am contented with just my Jammu and Kashmir, I am giving up POK, as though you are so liberal, you are so generous. In the eyes of the superpowers, that might matter at the time of actual negotiations. Okay? So these kinds of strategic aspects are all covered in Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, while ethics are also mentioned. And was Yudhishthira pretending to be ethical at that time? No. He was very serious. And because he was talking all these ethics only, when Draupadi stands up to speak, she says, Yudhishthira, you're a great ethical person. She doesn't talk even anything about a strategy. Even Sahadeva, he says, these people always talk ethics. My elder brothers always talk about ethics. What ethics in front of a person who is completely unethical? The other party violates the rules of the game. We should always follow the rules of the game now. Sahadeva says, because he doesn't understand the strategic aspects. Sahadeva is shown to be an immature young child who is emotional, angry, who doesn't understand the strategic aspects. And Draupadi also is made to look like a person who doesn't understand any strategic aspects. All she is bothered about is vengeance and how to redeem the insult that was done to her by disrobing her in the full court and all that. She repeats the same things. So the whole situation is very similar to what happens in India today. You see people who say that they have exploded serial bombs, they attacked Mumbai, they did this, they did that, like Draupadi. Draupadi is listing all the bad things that they have done, and she is saying they have to be attacked. People do this. So they say we have to attack them. But the head of the country every time repeats this, yes, I know they have done all bad things, but I would go onto the negotiation table only. Okay? So while saying that I am going to the negotiation table only, he never stops, he never avoids saying that it's a terrorist country. That is what Yudhishthira also does. Yudhishthira, throughout his speech, he says, Sri Krishna, look at the villainy of my uncle Dhritarashtra. How a great villain he is, how greedy he is, how he pampers his children, how he favors Duryodhana. He never stops Duryodhana from doing bad things. He goes on saying bad things about Yudhishthira throughout his speech, about Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra. Why? Just as the head of the country talks about the villainy of Pakistan, at the same time says he wants to go to the negotiation table. These things, when they happen, generally do you remember at some table when you were talking to friends in your own campus? Yeah, this fellow, he says Pakistan is a terrorist country. Again, he says he wants to go to the negotiation table. I don't understand these fellows. Right? Did you say? You said. I remember you said. I was there when you said this on your campus. Did you not say? Every one of us said this. At that time, we did not understand the complexity of statecraft. This is the complex art of statecraft, where apparently contradicting things have an underlying strategic interest. Okay?
Keeping the anger of the public lighted up. Keeping the anger of the public lighted up. Isn't it dangerous for the leaders of the country? Because if the army gets out of control because of its anger, and it starts taking decision without the leaders doing it.
as long as the leader is confident of his leadership skills, that he can keep either army or the public under control, he has got enough law and order maintenance mechanism, he has got enough diplomatic mechanism, he has got enough communication skills to keep things under control, there is no danger. Because if you keep on saying to the public, if the head of the country himself keeps on saying to the public that Pakistan is a nice country, Pakistan actually at the level of people to people contact, we always have very good relations. At the time of war, there will be no recruitments. No one joins army or air force or navy. They keep on saying at the people to people level, we are very good friends with Pakistan. We don't want to join army or navy or air force because we don't want to kill our good friends, Pakistani soldiers, Pakistani people. You should not be doing that. You should keep the anger intact so that when recruitment is announced, at the time of war, fresh recruitments are announced. When recruitment is announced, all the youth must say that we are ready to kill the Pakistani soldiers or the Pakistani people. Once recruitment happens, that mood has to be kept. But you know that there is this entire hierarchy of the military which can keep their soldiers under control. Once recruited, there is the discipline. Military is a highly disciplined organization. They can keep all the anger, everything under good control. So they know that. That is why it's not dangerous. You have to be confident of your leadership skills, that you can keep things under control. Right? Complex. Strategy. Correct. Huh? Leadership skills also matter. Okay. Now let me go to that topic in this parva, in this episode. Yeah, I'll come to that. I'm going to that. I am in the second one. But now that leadership has come, I'll tell you. Yudhishthira is asking for avoiding war. Your impression of Bhima, your impression of Arjuna is that they would also say, like Sahadeva, no, I am a great warrior, I want to go and kill people, right? But in this parva, Bhima, of all the people, Bhima, remember, he stands up and says, Krishna, go and avoid the war. Go and stop the war at any cost. Make Duryodhana's party and our party live together. Why Bhima does this? For this we have to go to Virata Parva. In Virata Parva, Draupadi is harassed by Kichaka. And Kichaka haunts her. Draupadi runs and runs into the court of Virata, the king. And there Kichaka comes from behind, holds her hair and pulls her, and she falls down. And then she says, is there no one, no male who can protect me in this court? It is at that context that Dharmaraja Yudhishthira says, hey woman, go inside, because they are pretending to be not related to each other and all that. He pretends as though he does not know Draupadi. She says, oh woman, get inside and all that. But Bhima, sitting there in the court, goes and picks up a big tree. He lifts the tree. At the time of just unplucking the tree, uprooting the tree from the ground, Yudhishthira says, oh, this Valala is the name of the cook there, he is always interested in wood for his cooking. So, see what is happening here. Why are you uprooting a tree for your cooking? He says. Valala, Bhima, understands the message, goes and sits quietly in his seat. During that night, Draupadi goes to Bhima's kitchen, where he is sleeping on the floor. It's all dark. Draupadi lays down there just beside Bhima and says, Bhima, you are the only good husband among all the five. You were so angry, you were uprooting a tree there. Look at your elder brother, how foolish and how cowardly he is. He stopped me and he stopped you too. Then Bhima says, see, the only guy who has the emotional intelligence that is required at all the time among us is Yudhishthira. Only because of him, we have not started our 12 years of Vanavasa again. If he would not have stopped me at that time, we would have been by now already into Vanavasa. I am emotionally very bad. I should not have done that. I should not have uprooted the tree at the time. But Yudhishthira has the enough emotional intelligence. The Sanskrit word they keep on using is dhairya. People in Indian languages, they always use the word dhairya as courage, boldness and all that. But in Sanskrit, the word dhairya means emotional balance, emotional intelligence. So he has got that dhairya. He has got that emotional balance. He has got that emotional intelligence at the time of adversity. At the time of crisis also, he can maintain that. That is why I followed whatever he said. So now you have the leader, you have the follower. Follower Bhima understands the leader's interests and leader's ability of emotional intelligence. Because he has done this repeatedly, because Bhima has understood that whatever decision Yudhishthira takes has a long-term interest and there is a strategic interest in that, there is a long-term benefit for their party, Bhima, in spite of being such an emotionally angry person, in this context in Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, he stands up and says, go, stop the war at any cost. It was not wholehearted. He was doing this only because he knew that the leader is doing that. If the leader is doing, there is some point there. There is some interest in that. Though I don't understand the whole strategy, I have to follow the leader. A leader who can convince his followers like this is the leader. Authority, we use in leadership discussions in management, we use the word authority. What is authority? Ability to control the subordinates, ability to be followed by the subordinates, ability to be followed by the followers is called authority. And they talk about various kinds of leadership methods and authorities and charismatic authority, traditional authority, legal rational authority, reinforcement authority, coercion authority. They talk about all kinds of leadership skills. But the first skill a leadership should have is to convince, persuade the followers that he does right all the time. Once the followers are convinced that he does the right all the time, they follow him. That's what is exhibited, demonstrated here by Bhima, the angry man speaking the pacifist language. It is at that time that Krishna makes Bhima speak angry language. He irritates him. He says, "Oh Bhima, how cowardly did you turn? Why are you speaking a coward's language?" Then Bhima says, "Hey Krishna, keep quiet. This is Bhima here. You call me coward?" And he becomes angry and shows that I'll show you when the war actually comes what Bhima is, then I will speak to you. Keep quiet, he says. And then Krishna says, "Oh, it was all just for joke that I said this. I just wanted to see whether Bhima is really Bhima or not. I know, actually I know that you are even greater than what you are claiming to be and all that."
Text, how do we contrast Dharmaraja's strategic vision with that of Krishna's?
I'll come to Krishna. There is another slide where we are talking about ideal attorney. The ideal attorney here is Krishna, the whole story. So we'll speak about the ideal attorney's qualities, then we will talk about that. So leadership, are you able to see this? Arjuna, then, he speaks pacifist language. He says, "Let us not go for war. Actually, I'm tired, Krishna," he says. "We're all tired, Krishna. Please go stop the war," and all that. at the end of the whole thing, when Krishna actually starts off, outside the city in the suburban area, when there is no one in the court there, Arjuna tells Sri Krishna, tell them that I am going to finish off all of them if they don't accept your negotiation. If your negotiation fails, I am going to kill them. Why did Arjuna speak two languages, one in the court, one outside? Very clearly, Vyasa is making us know that Arjuna was pretending in the court. When he was weeping, his weep was not real weep. When Arjuna was saying, sir, I am so tired and all that, it was not real tiresomeness. He was just demanding sympathy from the audience. And this sympathy from the audience makes the audience angry about Duryodhana because their hero is saying this. If Tendulkar, for example, says, see, I am not able to accept Miyandad's attack on me. I am tired. I cannot react to Miyandad. People will go and hit Miyandad. You know Miyandad? He was there in Pakistan, a Muslim fellow.
Would Yudhishthira have anticipated that there were Duryodhana's spies in the Sabha?
Yes, he was anticipating also.
Just as he sending spies, he would anticipate.
Definitely.
Because constantly Duryodhana has shown that he was continuing to spy on them, even in Manavati.
That is why the strategic aspects he was not spelling out. So while reading this episode, a reader has to bring out the strategic aspects all by his own cleverness in understanding the Dhwani. He was speaking only the ethical language. Only the ethical language, and he was only saying Dhanam is very important, Rajyam is very important. I want both Rajyam and no war at the same time. He is not bringing out the strategic aspects only because he knew the spies were there in the court. He was anticipating the spies of Duryodhana sitting in the court.
Arjuna was anticipating and showing that he is supposed to be the
Yes.
strongest there and showing himself.
Deliberately, to communicate to the spies of Duryodhana that Arjuna has become so weak, they will all laugh. When the spies go and tell Duryodhana that Arjuna was weeping, he was expressing tiresomeness, they'll get cheated. They'll think that, okay, now Arjuna has become so weak. But outside in the suburban area, when Sri Krishna was starting, he says, I am going to finish them off. All. He shows his Veeratva at that point. So Vyasa is very clearly showing us that this is strategic. Their behavior in the court is highly strategic. So those pacifists and human rights leaders in India might read this section and say, oh, these fellows were cunning, these fellows were cheating and all that. Yes, cunning, cheating. Strategy is all about, being cunning only. If there is a childish person who says, oh, politics is all cunning, yes. Politics is Kautilya. Okay, you have to be Kutila. You have to be strategist. So as part of that, you have to speak language which might look double talk, or which might look that you are saying one thing here, one thing there. You have to do all this. When you grow older, you have children, then you will know most of these things. In front of children something, when the children are not there something. Absolutely, there were many strategic blunders committed by Nehru regime during several wars, during UNO negotiations for Security Council membership. Many strategic blunders were committed at that time. So we can realize strategic blunders only when you know that which is right strategy. And which is right strategy is taught by this book Mahabharata, is what we are studying now. Are you able to see this? So this simplistic understanding, not allowing complex understanding of these books, saying does it allow war, or is it against war or pro war? Yesterday we have already discussed. Is it for war or against war? Is it for strategy or is it for ethics? You need maturity to understand all these things. You need maturity of political leadership, you need maturity of administration, you need maturity of war strategy, you need maturity of law and order maintenance, you need a very complex understanding of what is happening here to understand these books. That is what is called as craft. That is why we are using the word craft there. It's craft, it's an art, because you need such complex understanding of artistically, skillfully managing the leadership. You understand? So, it is also part of leadership to allow immature people like Sahadeva to speak that way. It's also part of leadership. You know that his speech is also useful. So, that is also part of leadership. It's part of leadership to make Bhima and Arjuna the leaders who matter to be able to follow him. They followed him. If Bhima and Arjuna spoke completely against Dharmaraja, completely against Yudhishthira in the court, everything would have gone to dogs. Everything would have got spoiled. But he was able to make Bhima and Arjuna toe his path. Right? Why? Because he is a good leader. That is leadership. He was able to convince. Yes. Now, then the problem, being a Kshatriya is difficult. That's what comes there. Kshatriya, he says, actually, somehow for some reason, the file could not get saved. Yeah, I'll show you. Papa kshatriya dharmoyam vayam cha kshatra bandhavaha. This is what Yudhishthira says. Papaha kshatriya dharmaha ayam vayam cha kshatra bandhavaha. This is the line that we should keep remembering. All the military, all the police officers keep saying the difficulty. Yesterday we discussed how the kshatriya dharma, military dharma, the police dharma is very, very difficult because there is a balance required between human rights and law and order and all that. Then the fate and free will discussion. Yeah. Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, part of Udyoga Parva, the number of verse is 46. Chapter number 72, Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, verse number 46. Since we discussed this line yesterday already, I am not going into this. This fate and free will discussion comes when Arjuna and Sri Krishna are discussing in the same chapter. Arjuna says, Sri Krishna, you are the avatar, you are Narayana. So both fate and free will are under your control. So if you want, you can stop the war. Please stop the war. You have to see how Vyasa depicts Krishna here. Krishna nowhere in this chapter says that I am Bhagavan. I am Narayana. He keeps on saying, elders are saying, I have got good dreams. I have seen shakunas. He keeps on saying these things and says that actually I am getting messages that war is going to take place through shakunas, through omens, through soothsayers I have heard, through elders I have heard. He never says, because I am Avatara, I know that war is going to come. It is only Arjuna who says, you are Avatara. And then he gives the example of agricultural field. He says, however well you have tilled the land, you have plowed the land, however well you have made the efforts, unless the rain comes in time, there will be no good crop. Similarly, however good human efforts are made, if fate doesn't cooperate, there will be no good result. This is given by Krishna. So it looks as though Krishna is supporting fate. He is taking the side of fate and not free will. That is human effort. He is not taking the side of the human effort, it looks. But he says that I agree, Arjuna, that human effort is more important. Because there is nothing that you can do about fate. Fate is already there. We know that it is fate. Whatever you can do, whatever is in your hands, is about free will only. So, let us put our free will, let us put our human efforts to stop the war. This I agree, he says. So, this is another discussion. Fate and free will is a very, very important discussion. The people have given the impression that religions are always fatalistic, but here Arjuna and Sri Krishna bring out the aspect of Daiva and Purushakara, the words that are used for fate and free will in Indian material, in Itihasas and Puranas and Shastras is Daiva and Purushakara. Purushakara. Actually, there is a Sanskrit phrase called Udyogam Purusha Lakshanam. How many of you have heard this line, Udyogam Purusha Lakshanam? Did you hear? Do you know? And in modern times they quote this and say that Udyogam means job, employment. Purusha Lakshanam is only males have to do jobs. Purusha is male. So they say to work, to be under employment is a male feature. But actually this line means Udyogam is effort. Purusha here means human. It's not male or female. Udyogam Purusha Lakshanam means effort. Human effort is the quality of humans. It is the responsibility of humans. So human duty is to put human effort. To surrender to fate is not human quality. Don't surrender to fate. Fight the fate, put your human effort. So, these are fate and free will is a philosophical discussion, and if someone says it's all in fate that Kashmir has to go to them, Jammu and Kashmir has to be given to Pakistan, it's fate, what can we do? It's all fate that China comes and occupies our land, fate, accept it. Don't put your efforts. The answer is the Shastras, Itihasas and Puranas and Shastras have asked you not to surrender to fate. Always put your free will first. Put human effort. And they always talk about karma siddhanta, right? Karma theory. and they say that this karma theory is fatalistic. Because they say it is all your karma. If you are born as a poor man, it is your karma. If you are born as a rich man, that is your karma. No. Karma theory is this. Udyogam Purusha Lakshanam is karma theory. Where you are born? Yes. Yes. Correct. It is fate. Yeah. Okay. That karma theory is not only to explain what has happened. Karma theory is to make you do karma for the next future.
So for this life, you have the karma that you had.
Not only in poor man's house. You are born in Africa. You wanted to get birth in India, but you were unlucky. You were born in Africa. What can you do? Yeah. So what can you do? You have to go to India. Yes, Purushakara. You have to put your Purushakara. You have to do your Manava Prayatna, Manava Udyaga, Manava Udyoga to do whatever is needed for you to go to India. Or if you are a poor man, karma theory is asking you to work hard to become rich. That is karma. Karma theory is not to explain the past happening or present situation. It is always to make you work for the future. The very first shloka of any astrology text tells you that we are talking only about Daiva here, we are leaving Purushakara to you. I can show you shlokas from Jyotisha Shastra Granthas. In the very first prayers of Jyotisha Shastra works, they say that my Shastra is not going to affect the person with strong free will. All Jyotisha books say. My friend was such a powerful astrologer and mantra person, mantrika. He was standing on the Usmania University campus when I was very young. He was my senior. I was going to collect a certificate from the examination department of Usmania University. He stood there and said, "You are going to miss the person in 2 minutes. You are not going to get the certificate." Immediately I reacted, I started running so that I can reach the place. That 2 minutes have to be covered. And there was a bus coming. I jumped into the bus, running, and I reached the place. By the time I reached, the person who has to give me the certificate was locking the room. He was coming out. But because I had good public relations there, the person said, "Hi sir, how did you come here?" I said, "It's for certificate." He said, "Yeah, shall we have some tea and then I'll give you the certificate." We had tea and then he again opened the office, he gave me the certificate. I came back. I would have really missed it in 2 minutes if I did not run. If I did what I planned to do earlier, just casually walk and all that, I would not have got the certificate. I wanted to oppose the fate. Because I knew that this fellow is powerful, whatever he says is going to happen, really. But I disproved what he said, and I came back and I showed the certificate to this fellow and said, "I got the certificate. Your prediction went wrong." Then he said, he recited the shloka. He said, "For people with free will, fate cannot do anything. If you exert your free will, fate cannot do anything." So, if there are instances where palmists have shown from the hand that your hand shows that you are an angry person. And after some time, the same hand is shown, the same person says you are a highly pacific, you are a peaceful person. Then the person asks him, "Earlier you said I am an angry person." Then he said, "The line has gone. The line of your anger has disappeared from your hand because you have the free will. You have control on yourself that you can change your personality from an angry person to a peaceful person, the line goes. Even the lines can change if you change your, if you put efforts. Okay? So the message from Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, from the conversation between Arjuna and Sri Krishna to us is, exert your free will, execute your free will, don't surrender to fate. Okay, sir?
If she wants reference, then Atyutkataihi punyapapaihi ihaiva phalamashnuте. It is a Purana Vakya. And in Jyotisha Shastra, Kasyapa for the Prashna Jyotisha is there. And in the beginning of Prashna Marga, in the first chapter of Prashna Marga, Kasyapakte riti jnatum idanim purva karmanam iharjitancha vijnatum karma prashno vidhiyate. So, iharjitancha vijnatum karma prashno vidhiyate. So, this is also a reference that our karma of this birth also will give some fruit, and we can eat that fruit also. Yeah. So, it is in the first chapter of Prashna Marga.
This is coming from the topmost Jyotisha of the country. He is one of the biggest figures in Jyotisha, you know that? He is a great astrologer. Is a great practicing astrologer. It is coming from him. He is saying that free will is very important. Free will, it works. All Jyotisha Granthas have it. I am not a Jyotisha by practice, but all my ancestors up to my uncle and my father were astrologers. I had all the books in the almirah. In the beginning, I was a very blind follower of Swami Vivekananda. So, I did not want to learn astrology at all because he asked people not to believe in astrology. But later at some stage I opened the books. Now I know astrology though I don't practice. I know the theory. I studied all the books. And in every book this statement is there. In every astrology book they say that all that I am able to predict is only Daiva. But your effort is different. It is not predicted by my book.
Daivam nihatya kuru paurusham atma shaktya is one of the Subhashitas. Yes. Daivam nihatya kuru paurusham atma shaktya.
So, within fate and free will, if our leaders surrender to fate, we'll be surrendering to fate. They'll be surrendering our free will to fate. So, in statecraft, there should be no blind belief in fate. They have to always encourage the population. They have to always encourage the soldiers. They have to always encourage the whole public towards free will. No superstitions, no belief in Daiva. Daiva is there, okay. We know that it is there. What can we do? Daiva is already there. All that you can do is your free will, your effort. Concentrate on your effort is very important. Believing in fate and always talking about fate is not good statecraft. A leader should not do that. Is the message from Bhagavad Dhyana Parva. And we have already discussed how simultaneously both are happening. Structure of Udyoga Parva, in the file that did not get copied properly, the entire structure of Udyoga Parva was given. I will show you the structure of Udyoga Parva. The first sub-parva within Udyoga Parva is Senodyoga Parva. It is not negotiations. It is Sena Udyoga. The military strategies, military efforts is the first chapter, remember. Then Sanjayayana Parva is negotiation. But there is Prajagara Parva. It is here that you get Vidura Niti, what they call Vidura Niti. It is part of Prajagara Parva. Here Dhritarashtra is being given the message about state and governance, how to rule, how not to rule, what to do, what a ruler has to do, what a ruler should not do. There is this Sanat Sujata Parva. Sanat Sujata Parva again is Vedanta within this Udyoga Parva. It's a Vedanta section within this Udyoga Parva. Then Yana Sandhi Parva. This is again negotiations. Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, again negotiations. And Sainya Niryana Parva is again strategy. Who has to play which role is being decided here. Then there is Uluka Dutagamana Parva, this is an Upakyana. But there is Rathati Ratha Sankyana Parva. Who is a Rathika, who is Ardharathika, who is a Maharathi, all these things are being discussed here. Then lastly, Ambopakyana Parva, you all know, D.P. Patnaik also brought this Amba into discussion when LGBT was being discussed, that we have the example of Amba being Shikhandi, that how to use this transvestite, how to use this Amba who has become male for the strategy inside the war is the last part of Udyoga Parva. So if you look at the way the whole Udyoga Parva is arranged, it begins with military. It does not begin with negotiations. From military, negotiation, military, again negotiation, again military. So the simultaneity of military strategies, simultaneity of building up. By building up, we mean building up the army, building up the soldiers, building up the formations. All this is done as part of Udyoga Parva, and negotiations are simultaneously going on. And what are the pro-war efforts and strategies? What are various negotiations that we have seen in the list? And what are the lessons for statecraft? Science and art of rhetoric, that is how to speak. Yudhishthira tells Sri Krishna, you know our party and their party both. That very statement says that a diplomat, an attorney should know both the parties. When you go as a diplomat, you should know both the parties. When this Sri Lankan government and LTTE were in negotiations, Norway offered that it would negotiate, it will go as the negotiator. India also offered that it will go for negotiations. As per this statement of Yudhishthira, you know us, you know them both very clearly. Norway is more eligible or India is more eligible? India, obviously, because Norway does not know Sri Lanka or LTTE as closely as India does. When you are sitting at the negotiation table, you should know both the parties, right? Not only at the level of international relations, there is a quarrel between a husband and wife, let us think. And both are sitting in their own parental houses. Somebody goes as an attorney. The complaint on the side of husband is that I saw my wife moving with someone where she is going for a coaching. This man goes there and says, see, why are you unnecessarily troubling that girl? The other party says, she is moving with someone, I have seen her moving with that person in coaching. This man then says, okay, I did not know this. He did not tell me about this incident and all that. Then the whole negotiation fails. But he knows, if he knows, he would say that actually the person who was moving along with her was a guide who was taking her to the best coaching center. He was not any boyfriend of that person. You should know if you go there. If you do not know the whole story, every time you go there, she tells some story, you will come back, I did not know. You come here, he gives another story, you say, I did not know. You keep on moving from both sides. But when you go, if you go with full story, full understanding of both sides, then you will keep on saying, I know what you are saying. But I have the information, I have the right information on both sides, right? So this, what a negotiator has to have is very clearly mentioned by Yudhishthira. You go there because you are the one, you know both the parties very clearly. And second statement he does, Yudhishthira in Bhagavad Dhyana Parva is, please speak harsh language and soft language both. Harsh language and soft language both. What is this harsh language and soft language both? What is he saying? Yeah, when to be soft, when to be harsh, and you have to communicate soft things in harsh language and harsh things in soft language. also. And you have to say that I am going to attack you, Pakistan. You should not say I am going to attack you, I am going to kill you. You have to say in a very soft language that you, Pakistan, you know that we have more nuclear warheads than you. Unfortunately, that is a fact. Actually, it should not have been like that, but unfortunately, we have piled up more nuclear warheads with us. What can we do? Yeah. So, Dhwani, subtle communication. These people observed in Atal Bihari Vajpayee long time ago. Do you know that Nehru sent Atal Bihari Vajpayee to United Nations when he was a young boy? In behalf of Bharatiya Jansangh, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the only member in parliament on behalf of Bharatiya Jansangh, he was just a young boy of 25 years and he was in the opposition party. That party which has no strength at all in the parliament, not to be cared, and it was Nehru there, but Nehru decided to send Atal Bihari Vajpayee to United Nations because he knew that he was the Krishna of modern India. He can go and speak both harsh language and soft language at the same time. People were getting surprised the way Atal Bihari Vajpayee says these things. Once Indira Gandhi in parliament said, वाजपेयी जी आप तो राजनीति कर रहे हैं इस बात के बारे में. Then Atal Bihari Vajpayee said, मैम हम तो राजनीति में हरिभजन करने को तो नहीं आते हैं. राजनीति में तो राजनीति ही होता है. Right? And he did not say anything in anger. He never used to say, Atal Bihari Vajpayee never used to say anything in anger. He just very casually, very humorously, he said, हम तो इधर हरि भजन करने को तो नहीं आते हैं, राजनीति ही होता है इधर. And whenever Pakistan negotiations were mentioned to him, he used to always say, हाँ कश्मीर बहुत मुख्य बात है, POK को तो लाना है, POK को वापस हम लाना है. Very softly. He knew when to be soft, when to be harsh. People think that he is a moderate leader, but he was a very harsh leader also. But he knew when to use that harshness. Okay? So any diplomat has to know when to be harsh, when to be soft. These words he has used in Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, actually almost towards the end of his words. The Yudhishthira's words end with this word. Please use both the languages, harsh language and soft language, both. Yadyad dharmena samyuktam upapadveditam vachah tattat keshava bhashetah satvam va yadivetaram. Satvam va yadivetaram means whether it is soft or harsh, whatever is required in the context, please use that language. So he is listing all the qualities of a diplomat, but Yudhishthira himself is a great diplomat because after telling all these things to Sri Krishna, he says, no, who am I to teach you? You know everything, you follow whatever you want. So he teaches and then he says, who am I to teach you? I am not more knowledgeable than you. You can do whatever you want. He gives a big agenda to him. After giving entire agenda, he says, so don't follow my agenda, sir. Follow your own agenda. That is Laukika Parijnana. He himself was a great diplomat. It is towards the end of Yudhishthira's speech, the number is 93. 72-93 of Udyoga Parva. Okay, so these skills of science and art of rhetoric, they are communicated. Yesterday we were discussing Vachya and Dhvani in both ways, Katha and Shastra. Yudhishthira is in a Vachya way saying how to be a good speaker, And through Dhvani, the way Krishna is speaking, through example also the rhetoric is being shown. Throughout this chapter, throughout this Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, Udyoga Parva, we have to follow Sri Krishna very closely to learn how to give a speech in a court, how to give a speech in a public space. He gives very, very good examples of speaking. For example, when Yudhishthira comes and starts his conversation, he says, "We have a problem, sir, Sri Krishna. We have no other God than you to follow." Sri Krishna's answer is in a very simple language, "Sir, I oblige. Whatever you tell me, I am going to follow, sir." Krishna, who was respected by everyone in the court as or avatar of Narayana, everyone was falling on his feet. He bows and says, "Sir, I accept. Whatever is your order." He uses the word order. "Whatever is your order, I am going to follow." But he is not that obedient later. When he responds to Yudhishthira, he says, "Yudhishthira, how foolish you are. You think that Duryodhana is going to accept your negotiation? He is a proud man. He is an arrogant man. He is not going to listen to you at all." Someone was asking, is there a strategy in Sri Krishna's speech? Yes. Here, at this point, he says, "Yudhishthira, did you forget the way they behaved with Draupadi? Did you forget whatever they have done from your childhood? Did you forget whatever they have done to you personally in the court?" He goes on speaking. If you translate that Sanskrit into English, it looks almost like Antonia's speech in Julius Caesar. Any one of you know Julius Caesar, the play, Shakespeare's play? A very famous speech by Antonio there. He actually enters the scene after the killing of Julius Caesar, when Brutus and Cassius, all those people gathered around. He says, "I am not going to speak against you, sir. I am only going to speak about the dead person. It's just a eulogy for the dead person," he says, and he starts speaking in a very soft language. He says, "Brutus and his honest men." This is refrain in that speech. He keeps on saying, "Brutus and his honest men, they are nice people. But Caesar, he was a bad man, because I have the will in my hands in which he has donated all his property to you people. Shall I open the will or not?" He says, and all the people say, "Please, please read," and then he reads out. And in that he shows that Caesar has donated all the land and all the properties and all the slaves to the public. Then he stops and says, "Okay, done is done, I'll go." Then people say, "Please speak." And then he keeps on speaking, and he provokes the entire audience there against Brutus and Cassius, and Brutus and Cassius are made to run. When they run, Brutus and Cassius run, and the whole public runs behind them. Antonio alone is left on the stage. He says, "Oh, the devil of public, I left you do what you want." Devil of public, devil, he calls it, "and I've driven you, do what you like, do what you want." Because politically, strategic speeches are very important, people keep quoting this Antonio speech all the time, and Krishna is like that. When he starts his speech, he says, "Yudhishthira, you are a foolish man. You believe that Duryodhana is going to accept this?" Then he goes on repeating, "You forgot what they did to you in your childhood? You forgot what they did to Draupadi? You forgot what they did to you individually, personally?" This is the rhetoric. You have to build up your speech in such a way that you build up anger in the people, anger in the audience. You are repeating the same thing. You forgot, you forgot, you forgot every time, and you are building up one after the other. Whatever bad things the other party has done, the anger is built up in the audience. And then at that point he says, "Yudhishthira, they are, according to Shastra, they can be killed by anyone. Why are they not killable by you? This he is not addressing Yudhishthira there. He is addressing the public. He is making them angry. The strategy is to make the public angry. He knows that Yudhishthira knows all these things. He pretends as though he is talking to Yudhishthira, he is actually addressing the public and saying that, "Oh public, be ready for the war." Most probably that is going to be the option. By the time, be angry with them. It is justified to wage war against Duryodhana. And if you see that speech, the way he begins and the way he takes it up and gradually he comes down, and then he concludes, Dharmaraja, they are not going to come for negotiations at all. War is going to be the option. Let me take leave. Thank you. He sits down. And then he again starts another speech while responding to Arjuna. He starts another speech while responding to Draupadi. Every speech is in different colors. While responding to Draupadi, he turns out completely angry. He says, "I'm going to kill all of them, don't worry, Draupadi. I'm going to destroy the whole Kaurava's army, don't worry." This he is doing because strategically it is very important. Draupadi is weeping. All audience are sympathetic to her. That is the opportune moment when the sympathy of the audience towards Draupadi has to be encashed towards anger of the audience towards Kauravas. Then he knows that moment, he knows that emotional pitch that is created. Immediately he jumps up and says, "Yes, I'm going to kill them." And then Arjuna stands up and says, Okay, Krishna, it's all right. Because Arjuna also is a strategic person. He knows that enough is done. Already Draupadi and Krishna have built up enough anger among the audience. But he should not end it up like that. And he says, "Okay, Krishna, it's all right. I know how angry you are with them, but I know that you are a balanced man. You are going to negotiate only for stopping the war. Am I right?" Then Krishna says, "Yes, I understand. I am only going to negotiate for stopping the war only." After giving such a big speech of anger, he comes down again. You should know this rhetoric, science and art of rhetoric is, if you follow the entire speeches in this, you will learn to become a good orator. And you will learn to play to the gallery. And you will learn to control the gallery. Playing to the gallery, controlling the gallery, both are very important. You should know when to respond to the audience, how to make the audience. You have to control both of them. This is given in the science and art of rhetoric here. And science and art of negotiations also, in both ways, in Dhvani way, in Vachya way, it is shown. Because in negotiations, what is to be done, Dharmaraja is already saying, you have to speak this way, this way, this way. But Krishna is saying that, yeah, I know, Yudhishthira, that I have to show to Drona, Krupa, and all the elders there that you are on the side of Dharma. Yeah, I know, I am going to do that. So with that he is saying that one of the strategic interests of negotiations is this, I understand that. So the negotiating person should know the strategic interests of the person who is sending him also, Preshaka. Duta should know the Preshaka and the strategic interests of the Preshaka. But he is not saying it in so many words, but indirectly in a subtle way he is saying that I know your strategic interests also. I am going to mention that. And he says, I am going to make your dharma interest public. This is very important. In one of the judgments of Supreme Court has said to the High Court judges that it is not enough if you are on the side of justice. You should make it known to the public that you are on the side of justice. There was a case which was brought from High Court to the Supreme Court, in which the complaint of the petitioners to the Supreme Court was that the High Court did not hear them enough. Then the Supreme Court heard for 3 months, there were hearings. At the end, the Supreme Court supported the High Court judgment only. It upheld it. But it said, you, the High Court Justice, the division bench of High Court. You did a very good thing by giving a good judgment, but what was wrong with you was that you gave an impression that you were biased by not hearing them. You thought that you knew what was right, what was wrong, but it's true that you were right in your judgment. I'm upholding you. I'm upholding your judgment. But what was wrong on your side was that you did not make them know that you are giving them a good hearing. So when you are on the side of justice, you have to make the other person know that you are on the side of justice. This Krishna in a very subtle way says to Yudhishthira that I know what you are looking for from me. You are aiming that I should make your dharma paksha known to the other party. That I will fulfill. Yeah. Know that you are on the side of justice, it's very important. You have to make the people understand that you are on the side of justice. You should not be dictatorial, autocratic and say, this is justice, I have pronounced it. Then the public would say, how do I know that it is justice? Then you have to give them good hearing. This is what Supreme Court said. And this principle Sri Krishna utters. So, in the science and art of negotiations, even if you know which side is judicious, which side is correct, you should always make the public know and all the parties know that you are speaking the justice. You are speaking the judicious aspects. You are speaking the ethical aspects. So now, finally to the ideal attorney, ideal diplomat, it is Sri Krishna. We are keeping Sri Krishna in mind as ideal attorney, ideal diplomat. What is he doing? Yesterday probably we have already discussed some of these aspects. The attorney should not assure his sender, the Preshaka, that his negotiation is going to be successful. He should always caution them that it might be unsuccessful, because when it is unsuccessful, they would blame them. Secondly, he was repeatedly also assuring that he was going to speak the language of peace only. Because when he repeatedly says, there is going to be war only, there is going to be war only, there is every chance of misunderstanding that he is going to speak that language, war language only during the negotiation. So he has to assure his Preshaka that he is not going to speak that language, he repeatedly, in this parva, he repeatedly says, he begins, this very beginning in this section, he says, yes, Yudhishthira, I know I am going to speak only for peace. I am going to stop the war at any cost. He begins with these words. And he repeats it with Bhima. When he provokes Bhima, when Bhima becomes very angry, and he says, just for fun I did all this. Then finally he says, don't worry Bhima, just to provoke you I did all this. Be assured, rest assured that I am going to speak for stopping war only. And then he comes back to Arjuna. When he speaks to Arjuna also, he again repeatedly says that. In the beginning, he tells Arjuna that war is only the option and all that. But towards the end, he says, but don't worry, I am going to speak the language of stopping war only. Stop agreement only, sandhi only. So this is another ideal quality of an attorney. You should know that you have to assure your sender that you are taking his message only, but at the same time you have to keep your sender prepared for the failure. Another quality of Sri Krishna that we see here is that he is implementing the strategy of Yudhishthira, that the mood of anger has to be maintained there. So that all the strategic aspects of the sender are being fulfilled by the negotiator, by the diplomat. And another quality of diplomat that we have here is spying. That quality is also there. Krishna assures that he would spy. Every quality of an attorney, every quality of a diplomat that is required is ideally there in Sri Krishna, and he is a good orator also. He has been shown in Udyoga Parva to be a very good, excellent orator, both in this court where Yudhishthira is sending the message and in the court of Dhritarashtra also. He almost persuades Duryodhana to stop war. But at the moment of when he getting convinced, Shakuni interferes and provokes him again, and there is a mood of anger again built up. But Sri Krishna is successful in his message. He speaks, he pitches up the emotions when required, he brings them down when required. He has got the qualities of a very good orator. So, ideal attorney also has to be good orator. So, that first bullet, science and art of rhetoric, is part of ideal attorney diplomat's qualities also. Ideal attorney and diplomat should also have the qualities of a good orator, is demonstrated in this section. And Sri Krishna is an ideal attorney and diplomat not only for these reasons, because he is humanitarian. When he is responding to Draupadi, his anger was not only strategic, his anger was because he was humanitarian. He was responding to a victim woman. When a victim woman is weeping, if you are not responding with that amount of anger, you are not humanitarian. There, if a victim woman is weeping and showing anger and asking for the war, if Krishna stands up and says, Draupadi, I understand, but what can we do? Your husband is sending me for negotiations for stopping the war, so I am helpless, Draupadi, please sit down. Then it would have been completely unhumanitarian. So his anger there not only was strategic, it was humanitarian. Okay? And he knew justice. When he was responding angrily towards Duryodhana, he was not doing just because he is a relative of Yudhishthira, he is a close relative of Yudhishthira. He was doing that because he was a statesman of the period. He was a statesman of that whole story. He was, I am going to talk about non-state players of governance. He was one of the non-state players. He was not a king. Krishna was not a king. But he was a non-state player of governance. The entire governance of that period was actually secured not by Duryodhana, not by Yudhishthira. It was secured by Krishna. Sri Krishna, as a non-state player, he was the one who was responsible for the governance there. So, whatever he was doing with the responsibility of a leader of governance. So, he is not only skilled in his attorney's qualities, diplomatic qualities, he is a good human being basically. He is a good man, he is a good person. He has humanitarian qualities, he has got karuna. He is responding with karuna. So that compassion for the victim, compassion for good people is what is driving them to become an attorney, a good diplomat there. That's also another quality that is required on the part of a good diplomat. Actually, there is a movie by name Thanks for Not Smoking. This is all about these lobbying people, lobbying experts. There is one lobbying expert who lobbies for tobacco companies, small cigarette companies. And his wife keeps on saying, why are you doing this? This is a bad job. And he takes his child also along with him to these lobbying activities and all that. The wife keeps on saying, no, don't take him. You are lobbying for bad people. But always on the way, he keeps on telling his son that this activity is all about skill, man. This is just about talking, your way of talking. And towards the end of the movie, he is angry with the tobacco companies. Then he moves on to the anti-tobacco activists. He becomes a lobbying person for them. When he speaks there, he defeats them, defeats the tobacco companies. The last shot in the movie is he shows his okay thumb to his son. The son also waves his hand to him, showing that, see, now I am showing my skills towards good activity. But this movie is a typical Western movie because it is saying that it is Vadibala, not Vadabala. Okay, there is no bala in your vada. The movie is arguing that Vadi is very important, his skill is very important. But Krishna is not like that. He has never taken a stand for example, tobacco companies. He always was on the side of anti-tobacco groups. He chose his job. There are advocates who say, it is all my job to even protect the killers, murderers. But there are some advocates who say that I never can take up such cases. I always take up cases of good people only. I will support only good people. Krishna was like that. Krishna always supported only the Pandavas. So that attorney, as a diplomat, he always took the side of the good people only. He did not take the side of the bad people. Those like this Thanksgiving, Thanks for Not Smoking movie, the hero of Thanks for Not Smoking movie, they think that it is your skill which matters, not your humanitarianism, not your ethics or anything. Whoever pays me money, I will go there. If they insult, I will go to some other side. I can support anyone. It is all my skill. But Krishna did not say that. Krishna always took the side of the good people with karuna for the victims. So that's another good quality of a good attorney, good diplomat that is shown in this section. If there are any questions, it's 5 minutes more. Yeah.
So many people like Yudhishthira, Vidura, Krishna, so many people speak about dharma and what is right, what is bad and all that. So in the entire Mahabharata, can we see any conflict between what these people are saying? Because Vidura, Yudhishthira and Krishna are mainly considered as those who know dharma. So whom do we accept and whom do we sideline if there is any conflict, or is there any such conflict visible?
Actually, there is no conflict among the various dharmas that these people speak. There are only various topics, there are various scopes that are covered by Vidura and Krishna and Dharmaraja. And the point is that the dharma speeches are not given by Yudhishthira, nor even by Sri Krishna. Speeches are always given to Yudhishthira. Narada gives him speech, Bhishma gives him speech. Others give him speeches, he does not give speeches to others about dharma, Raja Dharma or any other dharma. So those speeches by Bhishma or Narada or whoever throughout Mahabharata, they are not conflicting with each other. They repeatedly bring out the responsibilities of a king, what a king needs to do, what is his responsibility to the people. That's all. There are no conflicts at all. But there are different varieties of messaging dharma in all that.
I feel like there is also a challenge in getting the true message out of Mahabharata. This is one of the challenge, like whom
This
to...
is not the challenge. Challenge is what we have already covered. Do you agree that before coming to this course, before coming to this class, you had some opinions and you had to change the opinions? And the opinions that were there with you before coming to this class were all created by the media, by the Nehru established university system. That is the education system that we have. They have all created impressions that Duryodhana is a nice man, Yudhishthira is a bad man. No, Duryodhana, Ravana is a nice man, he is not. Ravana is a bad man.
I mean, we are now rereading all of this.
Okay, Ravana is a bad man or a good man, you tell me.
And he has some qualities. His bhakti to Shiva was great. That cannot be denied. But the other things, yes, not. So, in my head, I'm talking personally, no man is totally bad.
Okay, do you agree that there was a movie named Ravan?
Where they eulogized him.
And do you agree that there are many people who say, I like Ravana more than Rama?
It's trendy, it's fashionable.
It's fashionable. In the same way, is it not fashionable to say Duryodhana is a good man? Actually, yeah, there are many who say that Duryodhana, they don't say Duryodhana is a good man or bad man. They only say that Duryodhana was not wrong in denying land to Dharmaraja. Because after all, he was a king, he had all the kingdom with him. I even heard beautiful, interesting justifications for Duryodhana. Someone said that Duryodhana is an Akhanda Bharat man. He was not giving away land to Yudhishthira because Akhand Bharat will be broken into pieces. So that is why Yudhishthira was not giving land. Akhanda Bharat was to be protected by him. Okay? There are many such wonderful arguments given in favor of Yudhishthira. See, I asked all of you about gambling and the conditions put and all that. You were not having them in mind that why Yudhishthira was angry? He completed 13 years of difficulties. After completing 13 years of difficulties, he was given a negative answer by Duryodhana. This was not even coming to the mind of the audience when I spoke in the beginning. It was all because we have been fed like that. We are not told that the conditions that were kept by Duryodhana to get the kingdom back by Yudhishthira was completely fulfilled. It was a difficult fulfilling. For 13 years he has done, and he repeatedly says this in Udyoga Parva, that we have completed 13 years of difficulties. And how many of you are students of law? There is in law, okay, Contract Act 1832, very first definition, promisor, promisee, consideration. What is consideration? 13 years of exile is consideration. Consideration is fulfilled. Promisor has to fulfill the promise to the promisee. Okay, that is the fundamental principle. In 1832, they need not draft Indian Contract Act. This is a fundamental justice, principle of fundamental justice. The law does only the articulation of that in the form of vocabulary of promisor, promisee, consideration and all that. Basically, it's a basic principle of fundamental justice. My mother never went to school, but whenever we used to discuss legal cases at home, my eldest brother is an advocate. When we were discussing, she used to come and interfere and say, this is how the judge has to say, as if she was a lawyer. But all that she knew was fundamental justice, basic principles of justice she knew, and she used to always say. So that after 13 years of difficult experience by the Pandavas, the land was to be given back to them is fundamental principle of justice that need not have any law also. But it is articulated in the Contract Act 1832 from the very first section it articulates, right? So, any other question? Is diplomacy part of statecraft? Strategic studies part of statecraft? So, did we learn some skills for statecraft this afternoon? Okay. So, let us learn more of the skills of statecraft. Okay.